Bible. We're going to start looking at it in a second. We left off, I'm just to remind people or to share with people, let me just get this going up on Facebook. Where we left off is let me just get it up here for everybody to see. We left off with the suicide. This is the way I'm laughing because Achitophel resigns from his job as the greatest counselor to King David and his family by taking the golden parachute, if you will. No, he actually commits suicide. That's the way he quits. He goes to settles his affairs after his advice is not heeded. And again, it's the advice that would have helped Absalom win the revolt against David. Hushai undermines David's spy in Absalom's court, undermines Achitophel. Achitophel, David spared. Achitophel goes and or David lives to fight another day, if you will. Achitophel goes home, puts his affairs in order and hangs himself. And then David gets to the other side of the Jordan River, and that's where we left off. David reached Machanaim when Absalom and all his men with him crossed Jordan. So David's a little bit ahead of him, and that's where we are. Any questions? Everybody can see it okay? Maybe I'll make it a little bit bigger. And I'm going to turn it over to Rosemary. This is some interesting stuff we're going to read today. Everything goes back on itself. You got to pay attention. All right.
Absalom had appointed Amasa army commander in place of Joab. Amasa was the son of a man named Itra the Israelite, who had married Abigail, daughter of Nahash and sister of Joab's mother, Zeruiah.
Okay, so this is a little confusing, but it's important to establish who this guy Amasa is, because we're going to read about him today, his career, if you will. So who is this guy Amasa? Well, first of all, you see a little note here. The Septuagint actually says that he's the son of an Ishmaelite. And the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation, is not alone in saying that his father was actually not an Israelite, but an Ishmaelite, the ancestor of the Arabs, because it's also in the later retelling of the book of Samuel is the book of Chronicles. And Chronicles also reads Ishmaelite, which also gives him a somewhat different genealogy. But importantly, who is this guy? Well, he's related to Yoav, right? Because he's Yoav's nephew. No, he's
Cousin?
Yoav's cousin, sorry. And he's also David's cousin. Okay, so through Abigail. So this guy is related, and David and Yoav are also cousins. So this guy is all part of the family. He's related to David and Yoav, and he's their cousin, and he's a general in his own right. And he's going to be very critical for this story today, even though he's like a guy you normally wouldn't necessarily pay attention to that much. Very important, his genealogy, his connection. Maybe that he isn't even fully Israelite is interesting, but more importantly, really, it's that he's related, a blood relation of King David. And remember, King David has Moabite ancestry, so it's not that far-fetched that somebody in the family also isn't purely Israelite, but he's Absalom's Yoav. So David has Yoav, and Absalom has Amasa. And it actually says in place of Yoav. So Yoav is he went off to be with David to lead the armies in exile. And Amasa becomes now the head of the army in in Jerusalem, if you will. He's the new general. Really interesting guy. Even though we don't know a lot about him, what happens to him and his story is an interesting part of what we're going to read today. Not the focus, obviously, it's going to be Absalom, but interesting what happens to this guy. It just said, it seems the Ishmaelites and Israelites got along a whole lot better then. Yes, because there does not seem to be, and actually Ishmaelites and Jews got along well until the last 100 years or so. Anyways, so here we go to what happens with Ishmael. That's the theme today.
Was that it, Mark? Really, about 100 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, Arabs and Jews got along. Look, both of them were kind of under the pressure of the Turks, and so both of them were kind of somewhat disenfranchised by the Ottoman Empire. But sometimes the Ottomans treated the Jews better than they treated the Arabs, by the way.
Wasn't it the Mufti that really brought the anger and the?
Well, it wasn't just him, but he was reflective of, Arabs feeling that they had an opportunity to take control of Israel, of the land of Israel. And they felt the Turks gave the Jews a foothold. The British obviously gave the Jews a foothold. And, they resented the fact that there was going to be a Jewish presence in the land of Israel. So, yeah, I mean, they look, they refused, even to this day, to accept that the Jewish people have a right to Israel. On the other hand, they live there. And so, I mean, I also want to point out there aren't as many Palestinians living in Israel as we think there were in the 1800s. The reality is a lot of Arabs moved to Israel during the time of the Jewish move to Israel from Europe, the first waves of immigration, we call the first Aliyah. A lot of Arabs moved to that land because of Jews were moving to the land, and there was a lot of redevelopment. There was a railroad that got put through to Jerusalem. There was agriculture and irrigation and stuff that the Jews from Europe were bringing to the land that was beneficial to everybody. And there were Arabs who moved into that area because of the building and construction that was going on there. So the irony is, and they don't talk about it because, again, there was an Arab presence. It's in the heartland of the Arab, or not the heartland, but it's surrounded by Arabs there. But the reality is a lot of those Arabs came from Egypt, moved up from Egypt, or came over from Syria during the time of the Jewish Aliyah.
Yasser Arafat was born in Egypt.
Yeah, correct. And so Arafat's family and a lot of Arabs can trace their ancestry to Egypt. Look, I mentioned this the other day. The reality, too, that a lot of Palestinians don't want to admit is that they also have a lot of Jewish ancestry. If we look at the DNA of most Palestinians, most Palestinians are closer in genetics to Jews than they are to other Arabs. They don't want to talk about that, as we said, because it's a recognition that the Jews were there, but it is true. I mean, the DNA doesn't lie. Look, Jews don't want to hear it either because it means that, we're essentially fighting and killing our cousins, if you will. But we know that. I mean, that's what Ishmael, no matter what, Ishmael, according to the Bible, is Abraham's son. So, yeah, this is a sad situation. I don't know what the end of it will be. I don't see an end, but I could be wrong, but I don't see an end to this. I don't see an end to this ever, but I could be wrong. I mean, I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see an end to the situation of Israel being accepted by the majority of. I mean, even though there's good relations now with Dubai and with a lot of Arab countries, I just don't know how the Palestinian community will ever accept, to some extent, that there's a Jewish country there. I just don't know how it'll happen.
It'll just take years.
I guess. I mean, maybe it'll take 200, 300 years of it. But what I think,
intermarrying and being next to each other, and
but I do think it's going to have it'll have to be a whole different mindset, and somewhat it just has to have it'll come with time. But I don't think there's any other way of just literally hundreds of years. And again, at some point, the Arab community, they're realizing that the Jews really are not going to go anywhere else. You know, I think when the majority of Jews in the world actually live in Israel, which we're getting to, they are, that's already now the largest Jewish country in the world. But when the majority of Jews actually live in Israel, then people will say, well, yeah, that is the Jewish country. They're not going anywhere else because that's where they live. But that's also happening partly because of just the demographics and our assimilation, Israel's increasing demographics. But essentially that will happen because there's still a narrative that, you know, the Jews can go to Europe or can go back to, you know, can go back to Poland or go back. That's still talked about in the Arab world. Like it's, you know, like we left because of the Nazis. Like we, you know, we're really European, but we left because of the Nazis. When that narrative ceases, that will help, but that's going to take a lot more time. And like I said, I don't see. I mean, I'm sure maybe it'll happen, but I'm sure it's not going to happen. I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen during my lifetime. Anyways, got off the subject a little bit. Somebody's got a hum now. Whose hum is that?
Oh, no.
I don't know.
Is it me?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe. Let me see. Yeah. It was Gail again. Gail was doing good, and now we got some. She's got a line somewhere. So I don't know, but unmute yourself when you definitely please when you have something to share. So let's get back to Absalom's story.
The Israelites and Absalom encamped in the district of Gilead. When David reached Mahanaim, Shovi, son of Nahash from Abat Ammon, Machir, son of Amiel from Lo Davar, and Barzillai the Gileadite from Rogalim presented couches, basins, and earthenware, also wheat, barley, flour, parched grain, beans, lentils, parched grain, honey, curds, a flock, and cheese from the herd for David and the troops with him to eat. For they knew that the troops must have grown hungry, faint, and thirsty in the wilderness.
Yeah, and again, here's a level of detail that just seems to be, you know, not just they brought provisions, right? I mean, like couches and basins and earth. I mean, it's like, I mean, the food by itself is an amazing, you know, kind of reflection of what people ate back then, right? You know, when people want to know what did people eat 3,000 years ago in the land of Israel, we know this from the archaeology, right? You know, we find seeds and in the earthenware. You know, now we can analyze the biology of. I mean, there's people who their study in archaeology. They do nothing but study, you know, what people ate. And but the Bible tells us, I mean, the Bible tells us what these people ate. And so David gets provisions when he's on the other side of the Jordan River. So he's in modern day Jordan, and the people from that area, and it singles them out too, right? The people who actually brought him supplies while he was on the run. So they bring him food, they bring his troops food, which was something that the Bible wants us to know who they were, because obviously they're going to be remembered for supporting David. But again, it includes this guy here, Shobi, the son of Nahash. We read about Nahash. He was an Ammonite king. So here we have the Ammonites who David sometimes killed, doing the right thing by David, right? They could have attacked him. They could have not done anything. They could have not given him any food. But here they actually bring him out supplies. All right.
David mustered the troops who were with him and set over them captains of thousands and captains of hundreds. David sent out the troops, 1/3 under the command of Joab, 1/3 under the command of Joab's brother Abishai, son of Zeruiah, and 1/3 under the command of Ittai the Gittite. And David said to the troops, I myself will march out with you.
Yeah, so David, it says here how David established and kind of essentially put out the battlefield here. So he had thousands of people with him. And he divided his forces into three armies, essentially here. Now, he puts Yoav in charge of one, right? His general, his main general. Yoav's brother, Abishai, remember, Yoav's one of three brothers, the Zuriah brothers, if you will, who are all a little nuts. I mean, as we saw from Asahel, who got killed by Abner, they're tough guys. These are enforcers, if you will. They're tough guys, and we're going to see that today. So two of them now, the two surviving Zuriah brothers, are now in charge of 2/3 of his army, and the last third is this Gittite, Ittai, who's not an Israelite. He's a Philistine. And so he's put in charge of 1/3 of the army. So this is his battlefield. This is who he's putting in charge of battle. Now, all three of these guys are tough guys. But David says, I'm going to go out and fight with you. So you can imagine what's going to happen when he says that. So he says, I will march out with you, the armies. He's about 60 at this point. Remember, Yoav is roughly his age. Avishai is roughly his age. We don't know exactly how old Ittai is, but probably, again, 50 or 60 years old. Yeah, this is the old guard, if you will. And let's see what happens when he says, I will march out with you.
But the troops replied, no, for if some of us flee, the rest will not be concerned about us. Even if half of us should die, the others will not be concerned about us. But you are worth 10,000 of us. Therefore, it is better for you to support us from the town. And the king said to them, I will do whatever you think best. So the king stood beside the gate as all the troops marched out by their hundreds and thousands.
So he says, I'm going to go out and fight with you. And they say, no, you cannot go out and fight. So look, maybe it was Yoav who said this. Maybe it's maybe Abishai, who knows? One of the generals said it. Some of the people said it. Here it says the troops replied that this was a decision that David essentially is told by his army, you can't go out. Now, he wants to lead the armies. It says he wants to lead the armies. We would assume that David actually wants to fight this battle to some extent. Like this is probably not him going, I want to show how tough I am. He probably really does want to lead the troops in battle. He doesn't, and he probably also knows it doesn't look very good for him not to lead the troops because this is about him. And they say, yeah, you're right. It is about you, David. This is about you. And you can't go off in battle because you're going to be a liability out there because we could be surrounded and all the army is going to be concerned about. The rest of the armies are going to be about you. So you're going to put the troops in jeopardy because all they're going to be doing is trying to protect you. So you can't be out on the field of battle. You have to stay at home.
Isn't it also he might feel the need to, Absalom's younger than he is, and he's going to feel the need to show off still that he's capable.
Well, there might be something to do with Absalom. Not so sure that's the issue. As we're about to see, there's a bigger issue of what's going to happen in battle. And I think that maybe his troops, and especially Yoav, knew that they did not want David to be involved in this battle with Absalom. That not only is he a liability to the troops, which is true, it is true. They would give up their lives to protect him because it's all about him. This is about him. This is about David being in charge. So that's all they care about. And they say, you're worth 10,000 of us. So we can't have you as a chess piece out on you're not in play. We're going to keep you back at home. We're not moving you. as the king. And it is a very good analogy to think about the chess piece. He's protected back there in the town. So he's not going to go out in battle, but there might be another issue, kind of what Judith alluded to, but I think the bigger issue is what's going to happen with Absalom if David is out on the battlefield. So let's see, he stays back at home, which he kind of feels probably a little bit, like I'm the old man who can't go out in battle, or I'm I'm like I'm useless because I'm even worse, I'm a liability. So he stays back though. And here's what he says, and this might be the key.
The king gave orders to Joab, Abishai, and Ittai. Deal gently with my boy Absalom for my sake. All the troops heard the king give the order about Absalom to all the officers. The troops marched out into the open to confront the Israelites, and the battle was fought in the forest of Ephraim.
So we're not going to get a lot of the battle, the details of the fight, which is interesting because this is a civil war that literally pits the tribes against each other and some of the tribes against themselves, in the sense that King David's tribe, the Judites, are literally fighting against themselves, and even more so, that one family is fighting against itself. How many of David's sons fought with Absalom, and how many of them fought with David? In the family. He had a lot of sons, right? He had a lot of sons. And where did they go? Did they say, well, I'm going to cast my lot with Absalom? Or did they say, I'm going to go with my father, David? I mean, they might have thought, hey, if I'm with Absalom, if Absalom wins, I'm never going to be king. But maybe they thought if I go with David, my father, will be okay. But maybe other people thought, hey, I'm never going to be king. What do I have to lose? I'd rather not die. I'd rather sit people in Jerusalem are making this decision. Which side of this fight am I going to be on, the father or the son? Folks, this has happened in history. We don't have the archaeological evidence for this, but as I said, I think the story reflects a level of detail that somebody reported on this. But we know that this has happened in more recent times. This happens in monarchies. This happens in dynasties. And to some extent, in a little way, it happens in politics. We might see some internecine politics or parties turning on themselves as they're looking to figure out who do they support. This is real, and it's not a pretty picture. When people know what side they're on and they go, well, that's that side and I'm on that side, that's normal, right? But when you're like in the party and you're like, I don't know what side can I be on? I want my party to survive, but what do I have to do in order to keep who do I give allegiance to? So this is real stuff. And this is, I think we're actually going to, I think this year we might see some of this, between now and November, we might see some people, we might see some weird stuff happen in our country, where people, aren't really sure what to do as far as where their party allegiances are. So it's not death. It's not, choosing what side you're going to go off into battle with, but it's political suicide. It's or political death. It's career death. It's not the same level, but it's definitely hard, and it's not I've seen it happen on even local levels, but this is for life and death, and it's even more tragic in a way that this is going to be a family killing each other. And as we just read, they march off and fight in the forest of Ephraim, which means that David and his troops cross back over the Jordan River, and they fight a battle in the forests of Ephraim. Ya'ar Ephraim. So this is in the area north of Jerusalem, in the modern day West Bank. And the topography of this is very important. This is not open fields, right? This is not an open plain with, you know, armies arrayed against each other in a big field. This is a forest. And this is critical, by the way, for the story. You're going to actually see this. So the fact that it says that the forests, they're a character in the story. So as we're reading about this battle that's happening right now, understand that this is not an easy place to fight. If you've ever seen any of those movies that, where the Romans are fighting in the forests, or, usually it seems like it's Romans, but, a little bit of Robin Hood type of things. Strange things happen in the forest when you can't see the field of battle in front of you. And this is one of the characters. And again, we don't know a lot of the details of the actual battles. We don't get that. We do see some very important stuff that happens, though, in this fighting. So here's what happens, and it's going to go by very fast. So here we go.
The Israelite troops were routed by David's followers, and a great slaughter took place there that day, 20,000 men. The battle spread out over that whole region, and the forest devoured more troops that day than the sword.
Wow.
This is almost like Tolkien.
Yeah, it's almost Tolkien-esque. That's right. It is Tolkien-esque. It's not almost. It is. The reality is that it's a horrible slaughter that takes place. 20,000 people are killed that day in a battle where every combatant, every person that died was Israelite. Everybody. Now, again, the Israelite troops are Absalom's followers, or Absalom's army. They're called the Israelite troops. But it's not like Judahites were all on David's side, as we're about to see. David's followers were made up of Judahites, but maybe also, again, this Philistine army that he has. Maybe it was made up of other mercenaries. It was made up of other people like Ammonites and other people that, they got nothing to lose. This is a weird situation where, again, it's like Gettysburg, where, there's just a field of thousands and thousands of dead Americans. And that's why, again, this is hard to read without thinking of the Civil War in the United States. Again, why, all the battles added, you add up all the casualties of, U.S. fighting forces and, World War II and World War I, World War II. And again, it's nothing compared to how many Americans died in the Civil War, because every person that died virtually was an American. So this is terrible. And you can see that it's not just soldiers being killed by sword, but they're being, trampled on, as they're, trying to get out of the forest. They're getting, killed by branches and held up by branches, and this becomes a character of the story of the battle, and we're going to see the critical one right now.
Absalom encountered some of David's followers. Absalom was riding on a mule, and as the mule passed under the tangled branches of a great terebinth, his hair got caught in the terebinth. He was held between heaven and earth as the mule under him kept going. One of the men saw it and told Joab, "I have just seen Absalom hanging from a terebinth."
Right. A terebinth is a fancy way of saying an oak tree. Now, granted, it may not be an oak. It may have been another really big type tree that maybe we won't translate it as an oak because we're not 100% sure that it's an oak, but it's a big tree. The word in Hebrew is an elah. Elon, alonim is the plural, right? So Camp Alonim is the.
Do they not have horses?
What?
They didn't have horses?
Well, it's interesting that, it specifically says he has a mule, not a horse. So that's weird, right? That he's.
You have to have horses to have mules.
Yes. And so there is something interesting in when this has been dramatized, they do have him on a mule because it says he's on a mule, right? And you know, it maybe it's a little strange because it's not like the royal steed, but mules were really important in battle. They were oftentimes taken into battle because they can do things, or they can maneuver in ways that horses can't, and they're strong for their size. There's a lot of reasons why why they were used in battles, right? And used to transport things. So it could be that, he accessed whatever animal he could because he's retreating in battle and he's riding away. He had to get out and had to get away, and he just took whatever animal was there. Or it could be that that's what he actually was riding that day. Or he wasn't riding anything and he got on the mule because that was the only thing he could get.
It's just interesting that they could do that. Even back then they did mules. That they could do breeding like that.
Yeah, and they did. I mean, we know that they've been breeding mules for that long. Now, look, we know that in the Christian Bible, and it's based on the Hebrew Bible, or the idea of what happens when the Messiah rides, rides a donkey into the temple, right? For the Messiah actually is on the back of a donkey. It's not the idea that you had to be on a horse. There's a biblical precedence, I guess you could say, for it doesn't have to be a horse. So it is kind of funny, and when you see it depicted in the movies, that there's this mule that he's riding on as he's trying to get away. But is he being pursued on horseback? Are they pursuing him? Are they running after him while he's on the mule? It's definitely like part of the visuals of this, which does seem strange, but being on the mule puts him up higher, right? It puts him up at a higher level than if he had been walking. And what happens is because he's riding the mule, that is why he gets caught. His hair gets caught in the branches. So, assuming he's walking by, if you're walking by a tree, you're not going to be high enough that you get caught in it. In the worst case, you get your hair caught in a branch, you unhook yourself, or you cut off your hair. But this guy literally has this beautiful long flowing hair. He got caught, in midair, and that's what it describes. He's literally he's caught, the mule goes off, and he's hanging there, and he can't get down. So he can't, however high up he is, his feet are not touching the ground, so he cannot get himself free. He can't. He's caught. I mean, he's really caught. And whatever happened, now, if he could have gotten away, he can't now. The mule leaves, and he's stuck there. And this is the critical scene. So again, the whole order of battle starts right here. It starts one verse. They're having the battle, 20,000 people die. The battle spreads over the region, and the trees, the forest take many people. And then we get Absalom. That's 3 verses. That's it. So bang, bang, bang. We do not get a lot of detail. But the important detail, of course, here is that Absalom is left hanging. And this is such a visual scene. It's almost, again, like, you have to picture it in your head. This guy, beautiful man, right? Beautiful. We already heard how beautiful he is. He has beautiful hair. He's a rock star, right? And he's hanging there by his beautiful hair. It ends up, of course, his vanity is going to be it's his undoing. He's there hanging from the tree, and someone goes to tell Yoav about it.
Yoav said to the man who told him, "You saw it. Why didn't you kill him? Then and there, I would have owed you 10 shekels of silver and a belt." But the man answered Yoav, Even if I had 1,000 shekels of silver in my hands, I would not raise a hand against the king's son. For the king charged you and Abishai and Ittai in our hearing, watch over my boy Absalom for my sake.
So Yoav says, why didn't you kill him? Why did you kill him? I would have paid you if you killed him. And the guy says, I don't care what you pay me. You can pay me 100 times more than what you said. I still wouldn't have done it because you heard what the king said. The king said to all three of you, all three generals, all three commanders, do not hurt the boy. Do it for me. So I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to disobey the king. So Yoav, you maybe I've already figured what Yoav would say. Like, this doesn't surprise you when he says he's going to go tell Yoav. You've probably figured out what Yoav was going to say. But Yoav, his own soldiers tell him, I'm not going to do it. So you can guess what's going to happen now. Well, maybe you can't. Maybe you can't. Let's see what Yoav does.
If I betrayed myself, and nothing is hidden from the king, you would have stood aloof. Yoav replied, then I will not wait for you. He took 3 darts in his hand and drove them into Absalom's chest. Absalom was still alive in the thick growth of the terebinth when 10 of Yoav's young arms bearers closed in and struck at Absalom until he died.
Yeah. So it's a pretty violent, gruesome scene. One of the more violent scenes that we have in the Bible, I think. So Yoav takes 3 arrows, or 3, says darts, but we assume it's like an arrow, right? And he sticks them into Absalom, into his chest. But Absalom isn't dead. But Yoav drew first blood. And his soldiers now see, yeah, Yoav stabs him. I guess we can stab him too. And so it says 10 of Yoav's own arms bearers, his own pages, if you will, they come in, 10 of them, and start to stab, we assume, Absalom. That is a pretty violent end to Absalom. You can imagine 10 guys stabbing, beating the guy to death. That's a violent scene. So, Yoav says to one of his soldiers, go kill him. He says, I'm not going to do it. So Yoav starts it himself, and then 10 of his soldiers come up and finish the job. It's a horrible scene. It's a horrible scene. Remember, Absalom is Yoav's cousin too. I mean, it's David. And remember, David gave him direct instructions not to do that. And Yoav decided to do it anyways. Now, one can make the argument that Yoav is right. There is no way that Absalom can survive this war. What are they going to do with Absalom? They're going to keep him locked up in a dungeon for the rest of his life? They're going to exile him and wait for him to come back and start another revolution? There's really no way he can live. Yoav's not wrong. And he knew that if he brought him back to David, that David would spare him. He knew it. He knew it. Yeah, David told him, don't do anything to him. So this scene is exceptionally powerful. It is depressing. It's tragic. I mean, it's one of the most tragic stories in the whole Bible, the way Absalom meets his end. One could argue there is no fate. He couldn't escape that fate. To some extent, that he deserves this fate. But remember, folks, this whole thing started because David never punished Amnon in the first place. You can make the argument that this whole scene, this battle where 20,000 people died, was completely preventable if David had done the right thing in the first place. It's a horrible, horrible story. And I 100% believe it happened. It's one of the worst, most tragic stories of a monarchy that I've ever heard. I mean, if Shakespeare wrote this, you'd say, well, it's a little overdone. Come on. But why would you make this story up? I mean, how, at what level does anyone make up a story like this?
Truth is stranger than fiction.
Yeah. This story, I mean, this is our ancestor. This is our ancestor David. David Melech Yisrael. We sing about this guy. Still, thousands of years later, we still sing about this guy. We still talk about how amazing he was. But look at this tragedy that he has. I mean, it's not over either, by the way. The tragedy, I mean, it's over for Absalom, but it's not over for David. Because his son is now been brutally murdered. Maybe it's justice, but he had to die. But like this, he's literally treated like, I mean, at some point, 10 guys are stabbing a body. This is a desecration of a body.
Then Joab sounded the horn, and the troops gave up their pursuit of the Israelites, for Joab held the troops in check. They took Absalom and flung him into a large pit in the forest, and they piled up a very great heap of stones over it. Then all the Israelites fled to their homes.
So Joab, there's no more fighting as far as Joab's considered, as far as Joab sees, because Absalom is dead. So he sounds the shofar. That's what it says. Takaba shofar. Battle's over. Go home. It's over. It's done. We're not going to kill any more people. Which, to some extent, you know, as bloody and as brutal as Joab is, he doesn't wipe out the other army. He tells his forces, David's forces, it's enough. We're done. We got what we needed. Dead Absalom. Time to go back. And it says they took Absalom and they flung him into a pit in the forest. Now that's critical because we actually, we're going to get to it. We're going to see this description. Absalom, where is he buried? Where is this Absalom buried? Because it seems to us right now that he's buried out in the forest, right? In a pit in the forest, right? I mean, we just read that. They flung him into a pit, which is not a very regal burial, right? Threw him in a pit in the forest, piled stones on top of him. But here's the problem.
Now Absalom, in his lifetime, had taken the pillar which is in the valley of the king and set it up for himself, for he said, I have no son to keep my name alive. He had named the pillar after himself, and it has been called Absalom's monument to this day.
So where's he buried? Where's he buried? Because here it seems like he had a place set up for himself. He didn't have any sons. He was married, but he didn't have sons. And so he figures, I'm not going to be, you know, I can be remembered by making myself a really cool place of burial. But it doesn't seem like he got to be buried there. or did he? Because we have a place in Israel that's actually called the tomb of Absalom. Some of you might have seen this tomb before. This is right outside of the old city. And you see this, it's called Absalom's, the tomb of Absalom.
Is there anybody in there?
Nope. There hasn't been anybody in there for a long time. And you can see it's in the Kidron Valley. It's where all these, there it is right there.
Is it old enough? Could it be Absalom's too? Is it old enough?
So here's the wall, right? You see the outer wall. It's the outer wall, and then this is the Kidron Valley. This is where you can see all the burial places, right? So this is about as close to the old city as you can get, and people want to be buried here. But this is an interesting thing. It's a very unusual monument. Here's a picture of it from 100 years ago. That's what it looked like about 100 years ago, 130 years ago, actually. We know, and it'll actually probably even say here, right here, an analysis of the structure indicates the monument's construction in its first stages use happened during the 1st century CE. So that's around the time of Jesus, time of the rabbis. And the regular shaped holes in the monument are probably from the Byzantine period. It says right here, Absalom's shrine has traditionally been identified as the monument of Absalom, rebellious son of King David, based on a verse from Samuel, what we just read. And it says that a monument of Absalom did exist in the days of Josephus and was referred to in his antiquities. So is this the same place that Josephus referred to? It's possible, but the building that we have, at least there, dates from the time of Josephus. So probably not exactly that place. We don't know. We've called it the tomb of Absalom for a long time. If you look at it, when people see it and they go, what is that weird building? And it is a really weird building. It's a very weird structure. Here it is right there. It is part of a tomb structure, which we call the tomb of the kings. But the kings are not from, or whoever was buried there was not from that area. What's interesting is that these carvings and this style is actually very similar to what we see in Petra. You can see it up close here, a little bit better here. So you can see this is like the rock carvings that we see in Petra. So whether it was done by Nabatean builders or masons, it's a very, very good possibility because it's built around the same period. These holes were not from originally, that's why they say they're from the Byzantine period. We know a lot about, and this style right here, what's interesting is we found when we excavated King Herod's tomb at Herodian, very similar architectural style. It's a lotus flower at the top, by the way. People thought it was a hand. It's actually a lotus flower. So again, it's a weird tomb. It's empty. There's nothing in there now. There's 3 burial sites you can see. And you can see right here, it's been compared to Petra. So, but was Absalom ever buried there? Probably not. But it's an interesting little architectural strange thing that you'll see that probably is an ancient thing from 2,000 years ago, but it's probably not from Absalom. It's probably not that old. It's not, it's not that old. But it may not, Absalom, if he is buried there, he was reinterred because he's originally buried out in the forest. So another key thing here, of course, is he has no sons, which means that there aren't any people that are going to take vengeance on David or any of the people that are now going to be out. Because, I mean, it's not likely that Absalom's going to be, and Absalom's family would be able to be part of the mix of who could be king one day, because Absalom went against David, went against his father, went against the king of Israel. And this also, of course, shows now what David has to do in order to retain and assert his control over the people. And now he's dead. But that ain't the end of the story. The rest of the time today, we're going to talk about what happens with David and with the kingdom. Because you've heard everything that happened up until this moment. Absalom's now dead. Yoav is responsible. The civil war is over. But now, in true Davidic way, in biblical way, this is not the end of the story. The consequences now are going to fall out. So let's watch what happens. It's an amazing story.
Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, said, "Let me run and report to the king that the Lord has vindicated him against his enemies." But Joab said to him, "You shall not be the one to bring tidings today. You may bring tidings some other day, but you'll not bring any today, for the king's son is dead."
Yeah, so Ahimaaz is a priest. His dad is the priest, Zadok. So he's in the inner circle. And he wants to tell the king what happened. Bring king the good news. And Yoav said, no, shut up. You're not involved today. And Yoav actually tries to figure out, Yoav wants to control how this information is going to get to David. And Yoav knows that this is not an easy thing to do because, look, everybody heard David say, "Don't kill Absalom, take care of him," or try to take care of him. He did the exact opposite. So Yoav is very careful and wants to control the information, right? He wants to control the story. So he tells him, "You'll have another day. You're not doing anything today."
And Joab said to a Cushite, "Go tell the king what you have seen." The Cushite bowed to Joab and ran off. But Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, again said to Joab, "No matter what, let me run too behind the Cushite." Joab asked, "Why should you run, my boy, when you have no news worth telling?"
So here's the weird thing that Joab decides to do. Knowing King David and his propensity to kill the messenger, really, we've seen him do it already. When the messenger came and told him that Saul was dead, and he killed the guy in front of everybody. David is not going to be happy. And Yoav did something really interesting. He sends a Cushite to run back and do this. And I only want to say, there is a weird, I can imagine the Cushite saying to him, or saying to himself after Yoav gives him this horrific job, saying something to the effect of, this is what you're going to do to a black man. This is a black man's job, because the Cushite is African. He's black, most likely. Cush. It's from Ethiopia, Sudan. This is as dark as you could get in the Bible. And I can imagine this guy going back to King David, going to himself, "Yeah, it's exactly what I wanted to do today. Tell the king that his son is dead." Because, there's a good chance that David's just gonna haul off and kill him. You just don't know. Where's my red shirt? I can only, you literally couldn't write this. It couldn't be imagined. And anyways, it doesn't matter. Ahimaaz says, I want to go. Let me go too. And Yoav says, didn't I already tell you? You've got nothing to say. What do you want to go? You got nothing to say. You got nothing. This guy's in charge of saying it. You don't say anything. Now, again, you can make the argument that Yoav doesn't want any of the inner circle to talk about this yet. Just let David hear the news. Have a random scout, a random soldier, go back and tell David what happened. Let him calm down. Let him hear the information from not somebody who was there in the inner circle, who had some information about what really happened. Let the guy go back and just tell him this is what happened. The news, not, oh, and by the way, Yoav and his people were the ones who actually speared him to death. And Yoav put 3 darts. Just let the guy go back and say what happened. Just give him the information. No details, just give him the information. That's what Yoav wants to do. Of course, as you can see, Ahimaaz is going to be, a big.
I am going to run anyway. Then run, he said. So Ahimaaz ran by way of the plain, and he passed the Cushite.
I don't want to say anything, but this is Ahimaaz is an Israelite, and he's going to beat the Cushite. I don't know, but he ran really fast. On the other hand,
I imagine the Cushite wasn't in a big hurry to carry out this order. So
you could say that the Cushite maybe didn't want to run as fast as Ahimaaz did. Ahimaaz wants to be the first to bring in the news. The Cushite probably doesn't really want to give him the news at all. He'd rather go back home. But anyways, the scene is, imagine the scene. I just gave you the scene. I made it. If you didn't know that the Cushite was black, that's the only thing I'm giving you from that story. So picture that, if you will. Picture that scene. So here's David getting the news.
David was sitting between the 2 gates. The watchman on the roof of the gate walked over to the city wall. He looked up and saw a man running alone. The watchman called down and told the king, and the king said, if he is alone, he has news to report. As he was coming nearer, the watchman saw another man running, and he called out to the gatekeeper, there is another man running alone. And the king said, that one too brings news.
So David seems to think, probably logically, that if a guy is running by himself, he's there with some news to bring. This isn't just some random guy coming back from the battle, but this guy's running back with some information. So, okay, he sees one guy. He's told one guy's coming. And then he says, then the watchman says, oh, there's another guy coming. Well, I guess they both have news.
The watchman said, I can see that the first one runs like Ahimaaz, son of Zadok, to which the king replied, he is a good man, and he comes with good news.
Now, I don't know how Ahimaaz ran, that someone would know that's Ahimaaz. I'm not really sure. I don't know if his walk or his run was unusual or he was really fast. I don't know, but somehow the guy knows from his run that that's Ahimaaz, the way the guy runs. So I don't know if he kind of walks in a certain way, or I don't know. I kind of imagine how Ahimaaz is running, that he had a distinctive style of running, like chariots of fire that I don't know. Whatever it is, David knows, the watchman tells him, that's Ahimaaz. And so David gets excited at first because, oh, Ahimaaz is a good guy. He's got good news. Good man, good news. That's what he says. Besora tova. Besora tova. Interesting, right?
Ahimaaz called out and said to the king, all is well. He bowed low with his face to the ground and said, Praised be the Lord your God, who has delivered up the men who raised their hand against my lord the king. The king asked, is my boy Absalom safe? And Ahimaaz answered, I saw a large crowd when your majesty's servant Yoav was sending your servant off, but I don't know what it was about.
So Ahimaaz gets to bring the news to David, which is, it's great news. You won. You're saved, right? All is well. That's the words he used. All is well. Melech Shalom. It's all good. And you won. And David's first question is Absalom safe? So not how many soldiers died, is any of my army okay? His first question is Absalom okay? And Ahimaaz just lied. Well, if he didn't lie, he definitely didn't answer the question, because he knows Absalom's dead. And I think it's pretty much a lie, because he actually says, I don't know what it was about. So that part's a lie. So Ahimaaz wants to bring him the good news, but he clearly doesn't want to give him the bad news, which is understandable. I mean, everybody wants to be the bearer of good news. He wanted to be the first to tell King David, but he does not want to tell King David the other part of this, which is that his son is dead. So he doesn't do that. So he doesn't have any courage to tell David that part of the story. But it's a very human thing to do. Right? As they say, don't nobody bring me no bad news, from the Wiz. This is a very human story, which is that people don't want to be the bearers of bad news. But how could you not tell him? This is the only question that he has: is my boy Absalom safe? And he can't answer the question. So Ahimaaz tells him, but doesn't tell him that part.
The king said, step aside and stand over there. He stepped aside and waited. Just then the Cushite came up, and the Cushite said, let my lord the king be informed that the Lord has vindicated you today against all who rebelled against you. The king asked the Cushite, is my boy Absalom safe? And the Cushite replied, may the enemies of my lord the king and all who rose against you to do you harm fare like that young man.
Now that's a good answer. That's a good answer, because he doesn't say Absalom's dead. I mean, he doesn't flat out answer him, Yeah, he's dead. He's dead. No, he doesn't say that. He says anybody who rises against you should end up like he did, which it's implied what happened to him, right? By what he said. But he doesn't flat out come out and say, yeah, he's dead. So he gives him the bad news. He gives him the bad news. So the Bible recounts this guy Ahimaaz. We don't know anything about him other than he's Sadok's son. He was a priest. We don't know anything about him other than the guy does not have a lot of courage. He's not a role model necessarily for how we should behave, which is to want to give people only the good news and then not deal with the consequences of telling them the whole story, which is one of the reasons why it says that David said, step aside. That's essentially telling somebody, and one could make the argument that David knew at this moment where the guy doesn't answer him, we got a problem. I think David probably knew at that moment what really happened. But the Cushite is the one who actually tells him. Right? So that's the way chapter 18 ends. With David being told, may the enemies of the Lord, the king, and all who rose against you do you harm, fare like that man. Right? And again, the way the Hebrew is more powerful in a way because it finishes the way the sentence structure is that all who came to do you harm, to do bad to you. And that's what it finishes with. He came against you to do bad. I'll ask Mary, since Mary's there. What's the King James translation for that? I have a feeling maybe not. This is more linguistically correct, but I like it in Hebrew because it finishes with, they came against you to do you bad.
We're here.
What does the King James say, Mary?
The enemies of my Lord the King and all that rise against thee do thee hurt, be as that young man is.
Yeah, so they kept the same, it's the same structure, which is reversing it, but it actually is to do you hurt or to do you harm or to do bad to you. Because it ends with that word. They came against you to do you bad, which to some extent in Hebrew, the last word is they came against you to do bad, to do ra against you, which is the reminder that it's not about what happened to him necessarily, but anybody who does bad to you. And that's what they did. They tried to kill, he tried to kill you. So that's the way it ends the chapter. Now we're going to see David's reaction to this. And again, this is part of the power of this story, isn't just knowing that David is upset, but how he reacts and the way our story preserves his reaction.
The king was shaken. He went up to the upper chamber of the gateway and wept, moaning these words as he went. My son Absalom, oh, my son Absalom, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son.
Beautifully read, Rosemary. Really beautiful. And again, this power of this Absalom, Beni, Absalom, it's kept in the English kind of, but again, Absalom, Beni, Absalom, my son Absalom. So he's not just saying his name, but he says my son over and over again. He's saying my son, my son. So Beni, every time you see the word Beni, I mean, look at it right here. Beni, 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 Beni. I mean, in that one verse, 5 times, he says, my son, my son, my son. He says Absalom's name twice. And again, the irony that his name, Avshalom, the peace of my father, the peace of my Av, right? It's the exact opposite. But the fact that he mentions his name twice, but he says 5 times, my son. And the power of hearing this father cry out, my son, it's just, it echoes throughout time, because this is the, if you will, this is the worst thing a parent can know, is that their child died. And then compounded by the fact that to some extent, he had to die in order for me to live. That's the crazy thing here, is that David knows that it was either him or Absalom. And he actually says, if only I had died instead of you. He actually says those words. So if you wondered whether he felt it, you don't have to wonder because he said it. The Bible recounts that he said that. Somebody heard him say that. He said it. I mean, you don't have to speculate. People heard him say that. I would rather have died but you. The problem is that it's not just him. If he dies, the monarchy that he established, that David establishes, to some extent comes to an end. God didn't pick Absalom to be his heir. As a matter of fact, almost everything that Absalom's ever done has been bad or vengeful or calculated or not reflective of somebody who is going to make a good leader. He's manipulative. He's power hungry. He's beautiful. And he's charismatic. And David loves him. But this is not a good, would not have been a good king. And the writer of this, the editors of this, want us to remember that. But they also want us to remember that David, it didn't matter to David. David actually was devastated by this.
But if David did go into battle and Absalom met up with him, don't you think Absalom would have killed him?
Yeah. I mean, there's no question that Absalom wanted him dead.
Right.
Absalom says, I want him dead.
Right.
David, on the other hand, says, I want my son spared. He doesn't, I mean, Absalom says, I want my dad dead. That's why when Hushai gives him the advice, no, you don't want to let David get away. You want to kill him. You want to have a full force out there to kill David. That's what appeals to Absalom, is because he knows that Absalom, because to some extent, Absalom needs him dead. And I mean, he wants him dead. Absalom 100% wants his father dead.
Right.
David, on the other hand, wants his son to 100% be alive, even if it means, again, his throne continuing to be unstable, because as long as Absalom would be alive, this fear of revolt would exist. When's Absalom going to get another army together to try to get rid of him? He has no choice, but he doesn't care. David doesn't care. He wants his son to be alive, and that's what he says.
I guess it's like all us parents, we don't see our children we love them no matter what, and we forgive them for no matter what.
Even if it's to our own detriment, even if it's to our own health, even if it's to our own life. David actually says, if only I had died instead of you. And this is going to drive his people crazy, especially, as you can imagine, Yoav. And here's what Yoav does.
Yoav was told that the king was weeping and mourning over Absalom, and the victory that day was turned into mourning for all the troops. For that day, the troops heard that the king was grieving over his son. The troops stole into town that day like troops ashamed after running away in battle.
So here's the consequence of what David does by mourning and weeping over Absalom like he is. The troops that fought for David in this battle now feel terrible. And this day that should have been a celebration of their victory is now one of sadness and shame. And it says that they felt, as they came into back home, that they had actually lost, like troops that had surrendered or lost a battle. That's what it says. Like troops that would have been ashamed. They won, but they now feel like they should be ashamed of themselves. Now, Absalom is the general in charge of the army normally. On a normal day, before they got chased out of Jerusalem by Absalom, Yoav is in charge of the army. He's the general. He's the commander of the whole army. He's the chief of staff. Not the general. He's the chief of staff. In the battle, he's one of three that we just saw. He's one of three commanders. Troops are split into three. He's one of the three. But normally, he's in charge of all the troops. And so now he's dealing with the fact that his army has been humiliated by David in his mind. I mean, it's not in his mind. It says they're truly feeling like losers. They feel like losers. Didn't lose, but they feel like losers. That's what it said.
The king covered his face, and the king kept crying aloud, "Oh, my son Absalom! Oh, Absalom, my son, my son!" Yoav came to the king in his quarters and said, "Today you have humiliated all your followers, who this day saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines, by showing love for those who hate you and hate for those who love you. For you have made clear today that the officers and men mean nothing to you. I am sure that if Absalom were alive today and the rest of us dead, you would have preferred it."
So, well, let's finish Yoav's rant.
"Now arise, come out and placate your followers. For I swear by the Lord that if you do not come out, not a single man will remain with you overnight. And that would be a greater disaster for you than any disaster that has befallen you from your youth until now."
So everything that Yoav says is right. There's nothing that he says that's not true. He calls out David. And how many people could do what Yoav just did? How many people in the palace can say to David what he just said? Yoav is his cousin. He's been with him since the very beginning. From the very beginning, when they were fighting Saul, David and Yoav had been fighting together for 40 years by this point. And it's his cousin. And his cousin says to him in a very powerful way, we all risked our lives for you today. Everybody here could have been killed in battle, and you're taking Absalom's side? You hate those, you love those who hate you, and you hate those who love you. That's what you've done. You've shown that all of our lives mean nothing to you. And he says exactly what Mike just said. If Absalom had won, you'd be dead. And he says, and you would have preferred it. You just said that. But that means all of us would have been dead too. So you have no value for my life. And he says, if that is the message you're going to send, you're done. You're done. And that'll be the biggest disaster that's ever happened to you, is you will lose the support of me and all of the people who fought with you this whole time. So shape up, man. He basically says, get out, show yourself, and get out of this sadness right now, because you are damaging whatever credibility you have left. You're going to throw it out the window now. You have one opportunity now, essentially, to show yourself to be the king that deserved us risking our lives for you. So step up and get out of this now. He calls him out on it. He calls him out on it. This is what Yoav does. And this is why Yoav is such a complex character, because this guy is a ruthless, ruthless killer. Make no mistake about it. This guy, if he has to, he'll kill someone and not blink an eye. The guy is as ruthless as you can imagine, but he's also the only person, it seems like, in David's inner circle who can call him out. He's the only one who has the credibility and has earned the right to do it and has the closest to him. But remember Yoav. I told you when we first met him, remember Yoav, remember this guy. Because as much as the story's about David, Yoav is there the whole time in the background, and he is a force to be reckoned with. And David knows it. And I already showed you what happens to Yoav when David dies. I showed you when we read the very beginning, when Solomon takes over, what David makes sure happens to Yoav. Yoav is one of the more complex and vibrant characters in the Bible that doesn't get enough credit, doesn't get enough recognition, people don't really know who he is, but he is one of the more interesting characters. I don't know if he's a hero. I don't know if we can call him a hero, right? He's not a hero per se, but he's a complex man in his own right in a very complex situation. And
He's a fixer, like a Hollywood fixer, you know?
he is. He's Ray Donovan.
Yeah, that's
I would like him to be played by Liev Schreiber. I would like him to be played by.
me too.
By the way, Liev Schreiber just came out yesterday. He spoke at Davos and gave a great speech on behalf of Ukraine, which I thought was very powerful.
Wow, that's great.
Look it up. Liev Schreiber basically said, we got to keep talking about Ukraine. We can't let it leave the news cycle.
Right.
His own Ukrainian Polish heritage. He's Jewish, but his family was from that area, and he's done a couple of movies. He did the movie Defiance about the Belsky brothers that fought in World War II. But he also has done a couple other movies exploring that kind of a part of the world. He's played Russians and Ukrainians a few times in the movies. Actually, I think one day when they do the movie version of the Zelensky, he might be playing Zelensky. I don't know. Anyways, so it's a serious issue, which is, again, it's nice that he did that and reminded us we can't forget about what's going on there. But this is a tough guy. This is a guy who doesn't have a lot of necessarily easy choices to make in his life. And we're about to see him make another one right now, which is pretty brutal. But I don't know. I mean, it's hard to say that if I was in Yoav's situation, that I would have done things differently. It's tough. It's a tough situation. Let's take a look.
So the king arose and sat down in the gateway. And when all the troops were told that the king was sitting in the gateway, all the troops presented themselves to the king. Now the Israelites have fled to their homes. All the people throughout the tribes of Israel were arguing. Some said, the king saved us from the hands of our enemies, and he delivered us from the hands of the Philistines. And just now he had to flee the country because of Absalom. But Absalom, whom we anointed over us, has died in battle. Why then do you sit idle instead of escorting the king back?
So the average Israelite has a problem now. What do we do now? What do we do now? What do we do? Absalom's dead. So is the revolt over? David did do a lot of great things for us. He helped defeat the Ammonites and the Philistines and all these great victories he had for us. What are we going to do? But it says that the Israelites were arguing back and forth. They don't know what to do. But David, again, he does go back out to the troops. He does the right thing. And, that is there too. He went out and saw the troops. Doesn't say he greeted them well or whatever, but he did what he had to do as king. He comes out and he doesn't hide and cry and, make the troops feel bad. He comes out. But now we're back to the Israelites what do we do now? What do we do? So what do we do? What happens to these rebellious forces that arrayed themselves against King David under Absalom? the Israelites, the average Israelite, the tribes people, the people from Naphtali, or the people from the tribe of Dan, or Issachar, or whatever. Who do they support now? Because David was weak for a moment, but he's not anymore. Absalom's dead. Well, what does David do now? Because David knows this is happening. David knows that there is questions of his fitness to be the king. So what does he do? What does David do now?
The talk of all Israel reached the king in his quarters. So King David sent this message to the priests, Zadok and Abiathar: speak to the elders of Judah and say, why should you be the last to bring the king back to his palace? You are my kinsmen, my own flesh and blood. Why should you be the last to escort the king back?
So this is how we know. If you were wondering, what did the tribe of Judah do? David's own tribe. It doesn't seem like they took his side. So as much as Absalom had support of the northern tribes, right, which we would expect, because they don't like King David. We know that. King David took King Saul's kingship, So, they didn't want King David necessarily. But David's own tribe, the Judites, what are they going to do? Because they don't seem that excited. And so again, David sends the priests back to them and say, what's going on, Judites? Are you on my side? Where are you? Are you coming to get me? Are you part of this entourage? Because it doesn't look like they're part of the entourage. As a matter of fact, it appears that Absalom's biggest support maybe was with, it appears like maybe it's the Judites, the tribe. That Absalom did the very smart thing. And remember, he's a Judite. He's a Judite too. But that he got the support of his own family tribe, of David's tribe, his tribe, to get on his side. The Judites were actually on Absalom's side. So David is really in a predicament with his own tribe, with his own people, with his people who should have supported him, who did support him. Remember, they made him king, even the Judites made him king, even while King Saul was king. David was king of Judah. So David has not even got support within his own house, within his own tribe. That's critical. Like this right here, this little scene right here tells us how bad it was for David while he was in exile. His own tribe didn't support him. Now, let's watch what David does in order to garner support, if you will.
And to Amasa say this: you are my own flesh and blood. May God do thus to more and more to me if you do not become my army commander permanently in place of Joab. So Amasa swayed the hearts of all the Judites as one man, and they sent a message to the king: come back with all your followers.
Yeah. So David does something very clever. It's pretty manipulative. It's pretty strategic and kind of not a nice thing to do for a boss. Is he makes Amasa his general instead, his chief of staff instead of Joab. He took the chief of staff that was Absalom's chief of staff, the one they was fighting against, and he made him his commander, his chief of staff. I mean, he literally said, "Now Yoav's out, you're in." Now, Yoav is also, they're all related. He says, "You're my own flesh and blood." Well, so is Yoav. But he says to Amasa, "You're going to be my new commander." Now, it also seems that this is going to give him support within the tribe of Judah. By making him the chief of staff, this is going to win over the Judites. And it says that the Judites now say, "Come back with all your followers," which is interesting because it seems to imply that without their support, he doesn't even have a place to come back to. Like David's sitting there outside of Jerusalem. He's not in Jerusalem. And he actually almost has to he has to figure out a way to get back into power. So even though he won the war, it's not clear that his own tribe is going to support him. Like, they're looking for other options. And the way that he gets them to support him is by making Amasa the general, the chief of staff, the head of the army, instead of Yoav, who won the battle for him. I mean, Yoav actually won. It's still a brilliant move because, I mean, it's manipulative, but it's a brilliant move because it allows him to get support of the Judites. It gives him, it sends a message to the people who revolted against them that, it's okay. I'm not holding a grudge, right? So it makes those people feel like, oh yeah, we're going to get over this. We can put this behind us. And it also does something for David that he probably has been thinking about a long time. I don't trust Yoav. And remember, he knows what Yoav did to Absalom. He knows what happened. David knows. It got back to him. He knows. He knows that Yoav defied him and killed Absalom. So, David can achieve so many things by getting rid of Yoav and promoting Amasa. And it worked. Amasa gets the Judites to say, come back, David, we want you to come back. Which, by the way, doesn't seem clear that if he hadn't done that the Judites would have even done it. Like, what happens when David's own tribe doesn't want him? Pretty weird. It's not what you expect, and it's not what people remember of this story. They don't remember that David actually had to bargain to get himself back into Jerusalem. And the bargain is throwing Yoav under the bus. Yoav, who's been a success, who's been his right-hand man, who's been more than just the army commander, has been his biggest, most loyal supporter, has risked his life for him many times, but he doesn't trust Yoav. For all of that, he doesn't trust Yoav. And so he makes Amasa the head of the army. Well, I promise you, we're not going to finish like that. I can't finish like that. Can't have you hanging with that. So this is what happened.
The king started back and arrived at the Jordan, and the Judites went to Gilgal to meet the king and to conduct the king across the Jordan. Shimei, son of Gerah, the Benjaminite from Bahurim, hurried down with the Judites to meet King David, accompanied by 1,000 Benjaminites. And Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, together with his 15 sons and 20 slaves, rushed down to the Jordan ahead of the king. While the crossing was being made, to escort the king's family over and to do whatever he wished, Shimei, son of Gerah, flung himself before the king as he was about to cross the Jordan.
And remember, this guy, Shimei, is the one who was making fun of David as he fled. Remember, he's a Benjaminite, and he is from the same tribe of King Saul. And remember how he threw stuff at him? He's throwing dirt and stones and probably poop at David? Seriously, feces. He was doing a grumpy. He threw a grumpy at him. Johnny Depp stuff. Anyways, yeah, this guy runs out to meet David now to start the process of rehabilitation for himself. Now, look, there were a lot of people that did support David, but this guy really seemed to go out of his way to humiliate David. And remember, Ziba was the servant of Mephibosheth, who told King David that Mephibosheth had revolted against him, right? And that that Mephibosheth had gone over to Solomon's side, right? And to Absalom's side. I'm jumping the gun there. That he went over to, Ziba had informed on Mephibosheth, and remember, David gave Ziba control of everything. After that, he said, "Oh, everything that's Mephibosheth's, that's yours now. If Mephibosheth's going to choose the wrong side, that's his punishment." So Benjaminites, from Shimei, from Ziva, all of these people are coming out now. Remember, because Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, that's where Jerusalem is. It's right on the border. It's like in Benjamin. So it's very important for the Benjaminites to support the king. So here he comes. He throws himself down on the ground. Shimei, what does he say?
He said to the king, "Let not my lord hold me guilty, and do not remember the wrong your servant committed on the day my lord the king left Jerusalem. Let your majesty give it no thought, for your servant knows that he has sinned. So here I have come down today, the first of all the house of Joseph, to meet my lord the king."
Yeah, he thinks pretty highly of himself too, Shimei. He says, "Oh, if all the Benjaminites or the Ephraimites or Manassites, any of Rachel's, those tribes of Rachel," because it's interesting. He's not in the house of Joseph. He's in the house of Benjamin, right? I mean, he's a Benjaminite. But because the Benjaminites and the Josephites, the Ephraim and Manasseh, because those tribes all kind of probably see each other as one, they called themselves the Beit Yosef, but it's pretty much more Beit Rachel. Maybe it even originally said Beit Rachel, because that's really what makes sense. A Benjaminite, an Ephraimite, and a Manassite are all the house of Rachel. They're all related to Rachel. They're all, again, Rachel's sons and grandsons, right? They're descendants of Rachel. So he says, "I'm the biggest. There's nobody bigger than me from all of these tribes. The Benjaminites, the Ephraimites, these are all big tribes. Well, Benjaminites aren't numerically big, but they're powerful because they're right in the center, right? They're right around Jerusalem. They're in the heartland. They're not the heartland. They're the heart of Israel because they're in the middle. They're like control all the geography because they're right there in the center." And so he says, "I'm the biggest guy here, and here I am. I know you're the king. I know I made a mistake, and I'm here to beg for your forgiveness." So what's he going to do?
Thereupon Abishai, son of Zeruiah, spoke up. "Shouldn't Shimei be put to death for that, insulting the Lord's anointed?" But David said, "What has this to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should cross me today? Should a single Israelite be put to death today? Don't I know that today I am again king over Israel?"
So Abishai, Yoav's brother, again, another one, and he calls them out here as the sons of Zeruiah. He says to him basically, "Shut up. Shut up. I know I'm the king," right? And again, he says, "Put the guy to death." And he says, "No, I know I'm king. No one else is going to be killed today." And as if to further remind him, you and your brother and all of you guys, don't get in my face today. I don't want to hear from you. I don't want anyone else to die. I know I'm king. I don't need to kill this guy to know that I'm king. So none of that. I don't want to hear about it. So here's a perfect opportunity for David to take vengeance. And David says, "No, I'm not taking vengeance. I'm going to reestablish myself as king, and I'm going to do it by not killing everybody who, or at least not now. I don't need to kill people in order to establish my power. I know I'm king. He knows I'm king. I don't need to kill him." So here's what David does to Shimei instead.
Then the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." And the king gave him his oath. Mephibosheth.
So David gives him a pass. "You're okay, Shimei. You were done. You're not going to die." Doesn't say, "I like you. We're forgiven." Whatever. So you're not going to die. And it says, "I promise I'm not going to. You don't have to worry." He promises you're not going to die. Now we have the Mephibosheth situation.
Mephibosheth, the grandson of Saul, also came down to meet the king. He had not pared his toenails or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day that the king left until the day he returned safe. When he came from Jerusalem to meet the king asked him, "Why didn't you come with me, Mephibosheth?"
Right. So he comes to him all disheveled, right? He looks horrible. He's not been taking care of himself, right? And it says he hasn't pared his tone. He hasn't taken care of himself. He looks a mess. And he looks a mess. It's like it wasn't just the last day that he's putting on a show. I mean, even if his nails are long, it takes time for that stuff to grow. The mustache takes time for that to grow. It appears, and again, you know, not washing. I mean, it appears that he's really been upset. David says to him, though, where were you? Why didn't you come with me? When I went into exile, where were you? Remember, you know, he knows Ziba told him that Mephibosheth had chosen the other side. He had chosen to stay with Absalom. Now remember, Mephibosheth is differently abled, right? He can't walk. He can't use his legs. Ever since he was a child, he's not been able to walk. You can make the argument he's not able to get out of town very quick. So here's what Mephibosheth says to David, though.
He replied, "My lord the king, my own servant deceived me. Your servant planned to saddle his ass and ride on it and go with your majesty, for your servant is lame. Ziba has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like an angel of the Lord. Do as you see fit. For all the members of my father's family deserved only death from my lord the king, yet you set your servant among those who ate at your table. What right have I to appeal further to your majesty?"
So what Mephibosheth says is, I was planning on going with you. I was going to go, and instead they took my ass, they took the donkey that I had, and you know, whatever, I couldn't go. Ziba's making this up. And he says to him again, by appealing to David's, you know, power, and, you know, he says, look, you know, I could have been killed because of who I am. He says, actually, I deserved death. I mean, I was due death, if you will. And I don't know if deserved is the right word, but you get the idea. I mean, a new dynasty comes in and you would normally just kill everybody from that dynasty. But you took care of me, you brought me into your table. I was there, and you treated me well. You've treated me well up to this time. So I'm not going to ask for anything more. I mean, he says it in such a powerful way. You know, look, you do whatever you want. I mean, it's your choice. You're the king, and you've already taken great care of me. But he says it, I mean, by saying that in such a powerful way, he really does. Well, first of all, he says to David, I tried. It's not like I didn't want to go. Remember, I can't run. And they're lying, but if you don't believe me, you know, you've already taken good care of me. And he almost makes David, I mean, what can David do? Because if David now kills him, David really looks like, you know, pretty cold guy. But David, on the other hand, is like, I got two stories here. So what am I going to do? What's David going to do?
The king said to him, "You need not speak further. I decree that you and Ziba shall divide the property."
So all he knows is that Ziba came out and told him the story. I don't know what happened. This guy looks like a crazy man right now. He looks like he's been upset that I've been out. I don't know. Divide it. I'm not going to kill you. You get half of your stuff. He gets to keep the stuff. I don't know. I don't know who's lying. But we're splitting it down the middle and you each get half. That's David's answer, which is at least compassionate enough that he doesn't kill somebody based on, you know, conflicting testimony, right? So here's what Mephibosheth says.
And Mephibosheth said to the king, "Let him take it all as long as my lord the king has come home safe."
Wow, that's a pretty humble and very righteous thing to say. We don't know that he didn't get the stuff, but he seems to say everything right. Mephibosheth just knocked it out of the ballpark with that response. I don't care. I don't need anything. As long as you're okay, David. He didn't say as long as I'm okay. He said as long as you're okay. So that's a beautiful thing to say. I mean, you can't, if you're pleading for your life, you can't do any better than what Mephibosheth just did. Beautiful. Perfect. We're not done yet. There's other comeuppance. There's more comeuppance.
Barzillai the Gileadite had come down from Rogelim and passed on to the Jordan with the king to see him off at the Jordan. Barzillai was very old, 80 years of age, and he had provided the king with food during his stay at Mahanaim, for he was a very wealthy man. The king said to Barzillai, "Cross over with me, and I will provide for you in Jerusalem at my side."
Yeah, so Barzillai lives in the Gilad area. He lives in the Golan area. And he was one of these guys that took care of David when he was on the other side of the Jordan River while he was in exile. And David says to him, come over now back into Jerusalem, and you're going to sit at my table. You're now in the inner circle. I'm bringing you in. Now, the key, of course, is that Barzillai is 80 years old. Here's what Barzillai says.
But Barzillai said to the king, "How many years are left to me that I should go up with your majesty to Jerusalem? I am now 80 years old. Can I tell the difference between good and bad? Can your servant taste what he eats and drinks? Can I still listen to the singing of men and women? Why should your servant continue to be a burden to my lord the king?"
So he basically says, I can't enjoy that lifestyle. I don't need that fancy stuff. Doesn't matter to me. I'm 80. I don't need to go over there with you guys. So here's what he says.
"Your servant could barely cross the Jordan with your majesty. Why should your majesty reward me so generously? Let your servant go back and let me die in my own town, near the graves of my father and mother. But here is your servant Kimham. Let him cross with my lord the king and do for him as you see fit."
So he says, leave me alone. I just want to stay here. And it's tough because, the king orders you to do something, tells you to do something, you got to do it. But he says, you know what? Just let me be. I'll stay in my own town. And again, it could be that, he really doesn't want to go with him, or it could be that, he just, it's just too much of a nuisance. But he's being given an opportunity here. And so he says, look, take one of my people and, he'll be part of your entourage. So this guy, Kimham, who we don't know anything about other than he worked for Barzillai, he becomes part of the inner circle. And if anything, now Barzillai has somebody in the inner circle that can help him if he needs it. He's got a person there. So that's what he does. So, he deferred to one of his servants.
And the king said, "Kimham shall cross with me, and I will do for him as you see fit. And anything you want me to do, I will do for you."
So he basically says to him, I owe you one. I won't forget this. So you can stay there. You've got a favor. You have a chit there that you can call in at another time.
All the troops crossed the Jordan, and when the king was ready to cross, the king kissed Barzillai and bade him farewell, and Barzillai returned to his home.
Okay.
The king passed on to Gilgal, with Kimham accompanying him, and all the Judite soldiers and part of the Israelite army escorted the king across. Then all the men of Israel came to the king and said to the king, "Why did our kinsmen, the men of Judah, steal you away and escort the king and his family across the Jordan, along with all David's men?"
So now the rivalry between Israel and Judah comes back again, which is, why is David coming back with the Judites?
All the men of Judah replied to the men of Israel, "Because the king is our relative. Why should this upset you? Have we consumed anything that belongs to the king? Has he given us any gifts?
So the Judahites say, what do you mean? He's one of ours. Of course we're going to be with him, but he's not given us anything special. We haven't given him anything special. He hasn't given us anything special. Just relax. But this shows the tension that existed between Judah and Israel. The rest of Israel saying, why are these people getting special treatment? Right?
But the men of Israel answered the men of Judah, we have 10 shares in the king, and in David 2, we have more than you. Why then have you slighted us? Were we not the first to propose that our king be brought back? However, the men of Judah prevailed over the men of Israel.
Yeah. So the Israelites say, the northern kingdom, northern tribes say, northern part of the kingdom says, look, there's 10 of us. There's only one of you. And we actually recognized him back before you did. So why do you think that you have more claim than we do? I know you're his relative, but we're the ones who actually got behind him before you did. Yeah. This shows you that even though the revolt is over, the feelings that exist between the North and the South are still there. There is no end to this. From this revolt didn't settle that. If anything, it made it even worse, because now the tribe of Judah has joined on and gotten on David's side again, but it calls into question their loyalty to their own relative. This is a good place to end. This is where we're going to end. We didn't get to the part that I wanted to get to, but there's so much here, and we needed to spend the time that we did where we did. But the comeuppance is not over with. This story of David's return, well, he hasn't really even come back yet. He's still on the outskirts of Jerusalem at this point. But as he makes his way, and this is the great part of this story, as he makes his way to Jerusalem, his return geographically, physically, is matched with this wild return to power, where the jockeying for position of what just happened is insane. It's like you can feel the tension in this story, the personal tension, the political tension in this, in a way that's very, very powerful, because it always happens in any kind of politics. It really happens in monarchies. It really happens in dynasties where your relatives are also part of the mix, right? Because here the Judites say, he's one of us, he's one of our people. And the other people say, yeah, but you turned on him. And it's really weird, because this dynamic exists even outside of the monarchies. And I thought about it, like the relevance today, which is really interesting, because we have geographical differences in our country. And what's so interesting is that, we don't talk about it because, like, well, I guess we're in the midst of it right now. But we have a really interesting, I want to give you a modern, as we finish right now, I want to give you a modern equivalent analogy to this. Do you know what I'm about to tell you? Does anyone guess what I'm about to tell you? Anybody? There's a modern thing we're living through right now that's kind of this story. We had a president for 4 years who came from New York and New Jersey, who is hated in New York and New Jersey. I mean, very powerful, very well-loved, very beloved in Alabama, Mississippi, Arkansas, Oklahoma, real popular there, but he ain't popular in his own state. Became such an issue that he moved out of his state and now lives in Florida. So there is a modern equivalent to this, which is you know, what happens if the guy comes back? And this is a real weird thing that's happening within our own country right now. And we don't even see it because we're in the midst of it. And somebody at some point will analyze the historical and geographical political significance of what happened here. But to have a person who's unpopular in his own region, but popular outside of his region, is almost an anomaly in our history. It's not the only time it's happened. I mean, I could make the argument that George Washington was more popular in New York and Boston than he was in Virginia. I mean, there's, you know, the guy was not a big fan of slavery in his own state, you know, depended on slavery, and he was not a big fan of it. And, you know, people like John Adams and those other kind of people, Alexander Hamilton, they really dug Washington. But you know, there were people like Thomas Jefferson and some of the people in Virginia who didn't dig Washington that much. So this is not the only time this has happened in our country. But it's interesting when it happens because it's not what you expect. You expect people to be embraced by their regional relatives, if you will. They're people who are representative of who they are. But sometimes they're not. And David, you know, they're fighting over David right now in a way that's like, maybe none of them like David, but they all need David. He's the king again. And so what happens when this goes down? And I don't know what's going to happen. Nobody knows for sure what's going to happen. Lots of things could happen in the next couple of years. But if this happens in our own country, there's going to be some very interesting parallels to what happens in the Bible, which is people jockeying for position, rejockeying for position, trying to figure out how to get back in, how to be part of that regional alliance. So it's an interesting thing as I read this now, have a perspective that I never thought I'd have. Not from the standpoint of history. Yes, as an American, I read this and think about these kind of things. I think everybody who saw Hamilton thinks about these kind of things now in a way that maybe they didn't, 10 years ago, whatever. They start to think about how amazing the American story of our revolution and our politics were at that time, how more complex they were than we thought about when we were kids and whatever. But the fact that we're going through one of those periods now is no less remarkable. So I promise you, come back next week. We will be in person next week and in virtual, and we'll have a chance to finish up this story and, or at least this part of the story, which is David's return. So thank you, Rosemary, beautiful reading of Absalom. We didn't even talk about William Faulkner's book, which isn't really that much to do with Absalom, really, but he has the Absalom becomes a recurring theme, which is what happens when we're betrayed and what happens when the people that we count on turn on us, or even in our own families. All right, everybody, take care, and we will see you either not. We're not going to be in person this Friday night, but we will be. I guess we'll be in person next Tuesday. Hopefully, we'll see you later, everybody. Take care. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings.
Thank you.
Greetings and stay safe. Bye-bye.